The Seattle Seahawks are making a change at the head coaching position. Pete Carroll is going to be out as the Seahawks head coach. Now, he still could remain with the organization. There are ongoing conversations, but it marks the end of a historic era in Seattle. 14 seasons, a Super Bowl win. We know the energy that he has. He wanted to continue on. He said this week that he wanted to keep coaching, didn't want to retire, but clearly there were issues that they were working through. And really, Seattle had become a version of New England out west. It was New England West in Seattle. And those conversations were going on throughout this week, and they've resulted in the decision in which Pete Carroll is now going to be out as the Seahawks head coach. They will be embarking on a search to hire a new head coach after all that time in Seattle, a legendary run for Pete Carroll. They're making a change. Obviously, John Schneider, the general manager, will stay on, but they've been having conversations here throughout the day today and yesterday, and it has resulted in Pete Carroll leaving Seattle. They would like to keep him with the organization, have a role. We'll see how this plays out. It's a fluid story. It's still ongoing right now, but the headline today, Pete Carroll becomes the sixth or seventh NFL head coaching change right now. Seattle moves on from him as the head coach.
You mentioned how he had obviously a very legendary run there in Seattle. What went into this decision?
Well, I think that when you have a long run like this, you're evaluating the decision every single year. And there have been conversations about whether or not this would continue, the relationship between the Seattle Seahawks and Pete Carroll. And ultimately, in the end, the organization, with the backing of ownership, made the decision that the time to do this is now. And again, these calls and conversations were ongoing. It was very sensitive. Just like we're waiting for a decision out of New England. It's not a simple decision where you walk in and fire a head coach the way that the Falcons did on Sunday night with Arthur Smith. This is a different situation, a more delicate decision, and the Seattle Seahawks spent a few days going over it, but ultimately feel like this is the time to make a move and remove a legendary head coach in Pete Carroll to move forward. That's what they're doing right now, Christine.
All right, we'll see what happens moving forward there in Seattle. Adam Schefter with the latest. Thank you.
Okay, so obviously we're getting this breaking news in real time here on SportsCenter. Is Pete Carroll out in Seattle? And is this surprising to you at all, considering the Seahawks are coming off of a winning record, 9-8. They just missed the postseason, but the timing maybe is surprising you at all?
A little surprising, but I think to Adam's point, it is a very delicate situation when you have a coach who's been there so long and has so much success. It is not as cut and dry as, hey, we're going to go in another direction. Now, that being said, I do think this is the right move. He's been there for a very long time. Yes, he's had success, and yes, they had a winning season, but now is the time for a reset, because when you have a coach who's been there for as long as Pete Carroll has, and he's had his own versions of reset with players, with staff, with quarterbacks, you understand, okay, we've probably milked this for all it's worth.
Okay, I will say this, though. I mean, it was a year ago that he basically resurrected Geno Smith's career. I mean, it doesn't feel like Pete Carroll is done coaching, does it?
No.
With Bill Belichick, we're not sure where he's going. Is he staying in New England? Is he going elsewhere? Do you feel the same for Pete Carroll?
Pete has said that he plans to continue to coach, and yes, he planned to continue in Seattle, but there are so many interesting and attractive coaches that are on the market right now. I think Seattle has made the right move to say, hey, let's go throw our name in the hat with maybe a Harbaugh, with maybe a Vrabel, and see if we can reset this organization.
Yeah, I mean, there are some really good head coaches now out there on the market. It'll be interesting to see if they take the places of other coaches or these vacancies or what happens going forward. We'll obviously be updating you throughout the hour on what is going on with Pete Carroll and Seattle, as we are just learning that the Seattle Seahawks are moving in a different direction. And Schefter, we heard multiple times from Pete Carroll say that he wanted to be back coaching, back with the Seattle Seahawks. Do you think this news came as a surprise to him?
Well, I think it's surprising when you sit down at the end of the season and you have conversations and you find out that it's going in a certain direction, moving that way. Pete Carroll said on Monday that he didn't intend to retire, that he wanted to keep on coaching, that it was a situation where he would like to keep his current job. But when you have these conversations at the end of the season, as every team does, sometimes they take you in ways that you weren't expecting. Pete Carroll has all the energy in the world, wanted to keep going on. But the fact of the matter is the organization felt like it was better to move forward, making a change right now, which is why, again, they want to keep Pete Carroll around, but they were willing to make a change.
So it says that Carroll's expected to remain with the franchise in advisory role. But again, if this is someone that wanted to continue coaching, and I feel like we're doing the same thing here with Bill Belichick, who still currently is the head coach of the Patriots, but maybe these are two guys, two veteran coaches that maybe could find their way to another team. Do you think that's plausible with Pete Carroll?
Absolutely. If you are another team and you have a head coaching opening, I'll give you one right now. If you're the Los Angeles Chargers and you have an opening, what would be more popular than bringing Pete Carroll back to Los Angeles to have him finish out his coaching career? There are going to be options that every team looks at, and Seattle would like him to stay with the organization in an advisory role, as you mentioned, but that doesn't preclude other teams from making a run at him. And so where it gets interesting now also is Seattle will go through its candidate checklist. One of the candidates is expected to be the Cowboys defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn, who previously worked in Seattle in 2 separate stints and is widely respected around the league. Now, Dallas could be faced with the prospect of losing its defensive coordinator, which it doesn't want to do. That's a decision that organization is going to have to deal with if Dan Quinn becomes a leading candidate for the Seattle Seahawks. So it's not just that Seattle moves on from Pete Carroll. There's an opening in Seattle. They'll have an interest in other people. It frees up Pete Carroll. There are a whole slew of ramifications that this one decision today that the Seahawks made have on the rest of the National Football League. And every year, there seems to be some sort of curveball that people weren't expecting thrown into the mix. And here's the curveball today. Out of Seattle, Pete Carroll out as the head coach, the 7th team to be making a head coaching change this season. We still haven't heard anything from New England, and that tells you that this is going to be a busy year. By the way, 7 now, waiting on New England to see what happens, and what if something goes wrong with one of the playoff teams. So it's going to be a busy season. It already is. This is the bombshell today. Pete Carroll out as the Seahawks head coach.
You mentioned it being a curveball here, Schefter, and I think the biggest reason why it feels like one to me is the fact that 2 years ago, and I just asked Haas this, he basically resurrected Geno Smith's career. They did finish the season above 500, yet still, why now, as opposed to maybe 3 years ago where things were all in disarray?
This is just where they came to at this time as an organization. Again, I've been getting calls that these calls were ongoing, and you wait to see how they're going to turn out. You see the resume that he put together as the head coach of the Seahawks. Won a Super Bowl, got them to the Super Bowl. Huge regular season record with 137 wins. But again, even though Pete Carroll is in his early 70s, the man acts with more energy than people in their 30s. But they just felt like this is the time. And we'll see whether that's because they want to go after certain candidates or whether they just want to take the organization in a different direction. Here's the deal. Essentially, when people are in place for a long period of time, there are always tough decisions to make. As we said, New England's going through that now. Seattle was going through that. And after a while, it feels like change sometimes helps reset franchises. Bill Walsh in San Francisco always felt like a coach shouldn't stay longer than 10 years in a particular job. Some coaches outlast that because they certainly deserve to do that. Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh, Bill Belichick in New England, Pete Carroll in Seattle. But inevitably, everybody confronts the reality that their term comes to an end. And today that happens in Seattle for Pete Carroll. They decide that the organization will be better off going in a different direction with a different head coach. And we'll see now all the reverberations that this creates across the NFL.
14 seasons in Seattle, 2 Super Bowl appearances, and a Super Bowl win. I think he did a really good job. 137 and 89 record. Pretty impressive what Pete Carroll was able to put together there in Seattle. Adam Schefter, of course, thank you for all the insight with the very latest here on SportsCenter.